Hello, my name is Anna Amelia and I'm from North East Animal Rights, and we're doing another one of our Saturday Spotlight interviews. Today we're very lucky to have Kim Stallwood. Kim is the author of Growl and also working on a new book called about Topsy the Elephant. He also works with the British Library. The British Library have acquired 700 files of research materials. He's on the board of Culture and Animals Foundation, and he also acts as a consultant to TRM Recht in Switzerland. So welcome, Kim. Thank you very much for giving up your time, and we're delighted to have you today.
Well, thank you very much, Anna, for the opportunity to meet with you and to have this conversation.
Thank you. So we'll go straight into your questions. This is a question I ask everyone because it's very interesting to hear how people can sort of reach veganism. So can you tell us about your vegan journey, please?
Well, in the summer of 1973, when I was a student, I worked in a chicken slaughterhouse. And although I wasn't working on the killing part of the production line, it was the post-killing part of the production line. That experience eventually led me to become a vegetarian at the beginning of 1974. And then at the beginning of 1976, I then decided to become vegan. So I've been vegan ever since then.
I can imagine that would be pretty, so what was it about? You said you were actually involved in the killing. So obviously were you sort of like doing all the processing part of it? Which was
Yes.
pretty awkward, pretty awful.
It wasn't pleasant. I'm not laughing about it, but it wasn't pleasant.
Yeah.
It was the job that I had was to take the killed and cleaned chicken carcasses and get them into a plastic bag, seal the bag up, and put them on a trolley, which was then rolled into a big freezer, and so these were oven ready frozen chickens.
Yeah. So how did you make the connection between the animals obviously getting killed? I mean, was it just the trauma of the process, or did you actually make the connection with the live animals and realize that you were contributing towards it?
The connection was made through a friend who was also a student at the same college as me, and she argued with me as a vegetarian with what I had been responsible for doing at the chicken slaughterhouse. And after several months of argument, I eventually realized that what I had been responsible for was wrong. And she persuaded me to become a vegetarian.
Yeah. So we know that you're an independent scholar and a consultant as well as a published author. So can you tell us how you use those two roles to advocate for animals? And what's the most frequent areas of animal advocacy upon which you're consulted?
Okay. Well, as a consultant, I primarily advise on helping organizations grow internally with their structure, their programs, their strategies, with their identities, their corporate identities. And also I've consulted with organizations to help write various pieces of work for them. It varies from organization to organization and what their needs are. And I draw from my experience of working full-time for organizations since 1976. And that experience has been working in Britain and in the United States.
Yeah. So when I was doing some research about you for the interview, I was fascinated to look at some of the posts on your website. And one of the posts you put on were about being vegan for the animals and the issues which are being caused by the creation of vegan products in non-vegan establishments. For example, like McDonald's, and obviously, KFC have got all the burgers out now. And linking that in with, that one UK, I mean, international, but the UK group mentioned that we shouldn't quibble as vegans whether our food is cooked on the same grills, which most vegans were just absolutely couldn't believe it, up in arms about. So can you talk us through what you say are the issues of these establishments having not vegan products?
Right. That's a very important question to ask. I was also horrified by the animal rights organization which issued the request for vegans not to ask that their vegan burgers were cooked separately from the meat burgers. And the excuse they gave for urging people to do that was because they didn't want to give the appearance that vegans were troublesome. Well, I think the whole point of being vegan is to be troublesome on behalf of the animals, so it really defeats the object. I welcome fast food chains selling vegan products. I just don't. I just have no interest in going into fast food chains and eating them. If other people want to do it, then that's fine. I'm happy for them to do it, but it is of no interest to me.
Yeah.
I've been vegan for so long that I just haven't gone into fast food chains for decades.
Yeah.
And the only reason that I ever would go into a fast food chain is to use them as a public toilet. And I'm not going to break that habit now by going into, McDonald's and having a veggie burger. There is a certain amount of hypocrisy in my position, in the sense that I do go into supermarkets and buy my groceries, which sells animal products, but I don't consider it to be hypocrisy. I think it's more to do with the fact that we live in a very complicated society, and we have to make wise choices that we are comfortable with as individuals, as to how we want to be as vegans.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, breaking your answer down a little bit there, obviously we were quite outraged about this organisation saying that we shouldn't quibble about vegan products being cooked on grills which have had meat products or animal products. But I would say, by definition, if you were having what was a vegan product cooked on something which has an animal product on it, then it becomes not vegan, it becomes plant-based. So they are kind of like, they're expecting people to have plant-based products. And then the other part of it is, obviously, if you haven't been in a fast food outlet for quite some time, I would say that, I personally wouldn't, because I haven't been in one for quite some time either. I certainly don't agree with places like McDonald's sort of like suddenly kind of like coming out as if they're like it's a big promotion on vegan products, because they are a meat eating establishment essentially. But I think probably in terms of children who are necessarily not, they're kind of like interested in being vegan or looking at alternatives, it makes it more accessible for them. But it wouldn't, I think probably older people like myself would not necessarily go into a fast food place, just for the reasons you've said. We avoid them anyway, so we wouldn't really want to go into them.
Yeah, Anna, I think you're correct. And I think that we've got to be mindful that we aren't the target audience for these products.
Yeah.
The target audience is for people who are probably still eating meat and are wavering over, wanting to have more meals that aren't meat-based and try more vegan foods.
Yeah.
So I think for that, I'm pleased and welcome the fast food outlets providing these vegan products. But they're not for me, and they're not for you either. And we're not the target audience. Yeah. The target audience is the vast majority of people who still continue to eat meat.
Yeah.
And I think that the long-term effect will be that these the greater the availability of vegan products for people to buy in the shops and in restaurants and fast food places, the more availability that there are of these products, the more it's going to lead to people trying veganism and trying being vegetarian. So it's all generally very positive.
Yeah.
And then we might just sort of quibble with it from different perspectives.
Yeah. So you are what vegans call an old school vegan, because you've been vegan for so long. So I'm not saying that you're old, I'm just saying you're an old school vegan. So you were obviously vegan before it's pretty much mainstream now. Everybody knows what veganism is to some degree. Everybody's heard of the word, and so you were vegan before people had heard of the word. So what have been the main changes that you have observed over the years, and what are your frustration about the speed of some of the changes?
I'm not going to go on about how it was when I first went vegan and how difficult it was and so on, because that sort of sounds like, not bragging, but the main differences are what we've just been talking about: the availability of vegan products and the visibility of veganism, generally speaking. And that's sort of measured in various ways. One way that I measure it is that I've been reading the Guardian newspaper for decades, and for many years, many decades, the Guardian either ignored or then trivialized the whole vegan animal issue, whereas now they actually treat it with some seriousness, and that's a good sign. Although every now and then they do publish, I think, what I would consider to be particularly stupid articles. Another good sign is the internet. I think the advent of the internet is generally a good thing in that it empowers people to have access to information that just wasn't available when I went vegan. And when I went vegan, here I go. When I went vegan, the only way to get information was to write to the Vegan Society and wait for them to send you some leaflets. There was no other way to access information. You couldn't go into a bookshop and buy a vegan cookbook. There were no vegan magazines on the magazine racks. Whereas nowadays, the information is so freely available on the internet, which I think also begs the question is why, given that this vegan information is so much more widely available now, why is it that even more people aren't going vegan? Why aren't we making even more progress than what we are? Because it's not as if we can blame a lack of access to information anymore as being a problem.
Yeah, I think that you make a good point there, because one of the things I say when I do the little information videos which accompany our outreach, I'll say, don't rely on what I'm saying, do your own research. The research is out there, there's information all over the place. You can look at arguments pro and anti, animal, the vivisection, for example, and you can make your own judgments. So I suppose that is a frustration that obviously we've got all this information available. I mean, have we got too much information available? Maybe people are kind of, they don't know where, they don't know what to trust, because there's been so much, fake news, for want of a better term. Maybe that could be something to do with it as well.
Yes, yes. As with any exercise where you're accessing any source of information, you have to be judgmental about that source of information and can you consider it to be a reliable and trustworthy source of information. So just because something is available on the internet doesn't necessarily make it honest and truthful. You have to be very careful about what the sources are that you rely upon to provide you with the information you need. Yeah.
One of the things I say as well is when people do the research is check who is actually funding the research, or who the source of the research, because obviously a lot of these articles which the papers pick up are articles from the ADHB or something, the NFU. So they're going to say that things are getting better or animals are treated okay, so that it's kind of like it's almost like propaganda. So you have to be careful about not only doing the research, but checking the sources of the research as well.
Correct. Yes, I agree with you there.
Yeah. So some of the people I've talked to, and again, I'm going to sort of use you as an example as well. Old school vegans, animal rights activists for a number of years now. Now, obviously, I mean, my group is relatively new, but I have been doing activism for a number of years, and I've been an activist since I was the age of 14, but doing it in different ways. So how important do you think is that current animal rights activists, particularly the younger ones, remember those who came before them and learn from them as well, so we can preserve the history of the movement, because it is a massive, massive movement?
Yeah. I know that when I first got involved with animal rights organizations, I was ignorant of the history of the movement that preceded me. Yeah. And I rather arrogantly believed that the animal rights movement began when I got involved with it. Thankfully, I no longer think that way, but I think people still do think that way. And the history of the movement is long and rich, and there is much that we can learn from understanding what has preceded us and understand how we've reached the point that we've reached. Yeah. I mean, one question that I'm asked often is, are we making any progress? And I would say, yes, if you compare today's status of things with how it was when you first got involved with the issue. Yeah. And if you got involved with it 10 years ago, well, then you can measure progress and so on. But to not know the history of the movement and not know the key players and the key issues, many of which occur all the time, then I think it doesn't equip you with an understanding to be a more effective activist today. You become, I believe, a more effective activist today if you understand the past and why we've reached the points that we have reached so far.
Yeah, I think a lot of people will think that veganism started in 1944, and that we kind of like measure our progress from there. But I know, I mean, Jordi Casamajana, who I interviewed, he went on the history of veganism throughout the centuries, and obviously there's people standing up well before 1944 to, you know, to sort of like to create this movement, not necessarily to create a movement, but to make things better for animals. So there's people throughout history really who have stood up for animals. It's just that the fact that we've got better ways of documenting it now, probably, which is why we're kind of like talking about the more recent history of the movement, I suppose.
Yes, and the same is true of people who wrote about animal rights. People wrote about animal rights long before you know, the contemporary animal rights movement has been writing about it over the last 40, 50 odd years. And there's, as I say, there's a rich history of material that people should be aware of and read about. And this information can easily be traced onto various websites and things. Yeah. And one of the important roles that I'm playing at the moment is taking action to preserve the history of the animal rights movement as it is happening today. Yeah. And that's the reason why the British Library acquired all those research files from me and various other resources, because they knew that these materials were the source materials of understanding the development of the animal rights movement from mostly from when I got involved with it, but also predating it, because much of the information in those files was material that I acquired that was before I got involved. You know, it's historic information. Yeah. And we've got an opportunity coming up in July where there's the bicentenary of the Martins Act. And the Martins Act was a piece of legislation passed by the British government 200 years ago that is generally recognized as being the first piece of animal welfare legislation passed by an elected government. And it was the focus of cattle and moving cattle to slaughterhouses and looking after cattle and other farmed animals. And so we've had, you know, one could argue 200 years of activity for animals, that if we started the 200 years from the passage of the Martins Act. So understanding this history is vitally important. And, you know, the debate about whether we should go for the abolition of issues or go for step-by-step regulatory measures, that debate was happening in the 1870s among the anti-vivisectionists of that time. So there's really nothing new here that we are talking about for the first time. You can generally find that our predecessors were also grappling with the same issues then. Yeah.
Now you touched briefly on politics there, but you talked about the act coming through government. And most countries tend not to mix politics and animal rights. Some of the mainstream parties, the Labour Party, for example, and the Green Party, have animal welfare policies, but they're welfare, and it's almost as an afterthought. Now we are seeing, you know, political parties like the Animal Justice Party in Australia and the Animal Welfare Party in the UK, who are being formed solely to advance the rights of animals. But we have, you know, a well-established political party, the Greens, who should be a natural fit for vegans, but still don't talk about veganism. So why do you think that is? Do you think it's because they assume that they're going to lose votes? Or, I mean, I kind of have my own opinions on it, but I'd be interested to hear what you think in terms of the politics and the animal rights part of it.
The issue of animal rights and politics, mainstream politics, is a very important one. And I often argue that the single greatest challenge that we have as an animal rights movement is making animal rights a mainstream political issue. Yeah. And every issue, every aspect of life is a political issue. Nothing is not a political issue. Yeah. And our treatment of animals is exactly a political issue. By mainstream political argument, what I'm talking about is getting the mainstream political parties on board to embrace and understand what it means to be concerned about animals, and what are the consequences of implementing legislation to protect animals, and what are the benefits to both animals and humans and society at large and the environment.
Mm.
My preferred course of action is to encourage people to join the political party of their choice.
Mm.
Now, some people may not want to join any political party, and that's entirely up to them. I'm not forcing anyone to do anything, but people who feel predisposed to, other than go vegan, but people who are predisposed to a political party should consider joining that political party and working from within that political party to advance animal issues. And by that, it is speaking about the plight of animals, getting resolutions passed, working at party conferences to advance the animal issue. There are some organizations that are dedicated to helping animals already in the mainstream political parties. So all that is important and good. And what we need to be able to do across the country is whenever there are elections, is raise the animal issue in the hustings, on the doorstep, because people who stand for election pay attention to the issues that get being talked about. And if we don't talk about animals on the doorstep in elections, the candidates won't pay attention to the issue.
Yeah.
With respect to the organizations which are the political parties for animals, if that's the direction in which people want to go in, then that's fine. I encourage anyone who feels that's the way forward to go, then get involved and play your role in it. My preference is to work within the mainstream political parties, because it's going to be the mainstream political parties who are going to be elected to form governments. And ultimately what you want is a mainstream political party who is pro-animal rights to form governments, because when they become the government, they have the power to be able to develop public policy and pass legislation, much more so than what they're willing to do at the moment.
Yeah, I think I used to be in the Labour Party, and I was the agent for our local MP. So one of the things which we did was obviously go around door knocking. I'm not in the Labour Party now. I feel as if obviously I'm in between Labour and in the Greens because of the animal rights issues. But one of the things I did was we went around door knocking, and a couple of times we were asked about animal rights issues, which was really, really refreshing, particularly in the area which I live, is a small seaside town. Because we have a particular difficulty with veganism in this area, whereas if you go to the bigger cities, obviously it's much more widely accepted. But one of the people on the doors actually asked me, what is your party's policies on animal rights, not animal welfare, on animal rights, so it was good to be able to do that. But obviously the politics part of it as well, because I was involved in local politics, I've got lots of contacts within the council as well, and we work together on different animal related topics. So we did get a lot of people who were saying, they don't understand politics, they're not interested in politics. But as you said at the beginning there, politics is everything. It affects every little thing you do, whether you go out any front door and it's an issue with the local parking, or it's the petrol, or the petrol costs, or the food costs in a shop. And I wonder if we need to just, I don't know if people maybe just hear the thing about animal rights and animal welfare and think that's kind of like not their worries at the moment. So we look at, the climate change stuff and the environment and everything. It's complicated, isn't it? It's really, really complicated.
It is complicated, but I think there's actually a very simple way to think about this, and that is that we need to make individual change, as each of us as citizens of society. We each can make change as an individual by the products we buy, and being vegan is basically the name of someone who boycotts animal products, and it's obviously much more than that, but that's basically what it means. We need to, on the flip side, there's the individual action, but on the other side is the fact that we need institutional change. And institutional change means changing the legislation and the public policy so that it respects animals and considers animals whenever a decision is being made. So we need individual change and institutional change. They're two sides of the same coin. At the moment, I think our movement is more focused upon individual change, lifestyle choice, going vegan and all the rest of it, and not enough focused upon institutional change. because
Yeah.
not everyone is going to go vegan. I mean, I'd love to believe to think that everyone will go vegan, but I really don't think they will. But we can get the maximum number of people through institutional change to change their behavior, because products are no longer legally available to be produced, for example, and that's why we need the dual approach of institutional and individual change.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. So you've spoken and you've worked and spoken at lots of events around the world. So what are the differences that you see between country to country, or even continent to continent, and what are the similarities, and what can we in the UK learn from others?
Wow, that's a big question. There's every country can learn something else from other countries, and well, I mean, India comes to mind, which I've been very lucky to go to on 2 occasions, and very much look forward to going back. India is a very complicated and confusing and overwhelming country, but and it's far from being a heaven land for animals there. But there is a difference in attitude towards animals in India, generally speaking. And more specifically, I can briefly say that when I first went to India, I was very concerned about several things, but one of them was seeing dogs living in the streets. And I haven't really gone to countries before where that would be something that you would see all the time. And but what I learned was that yes, there are dogs living on the streets of India, and there are some horrid cruelty cases, and the cases whereby dogs get sick or get run over, and they need treatment. And there are some. I've grown to learn that there are some wonderful, truly wonderful organizations in India, in the cities and in the areas and districts and the villages, who do marvelous, heroic work rescuing these dogs. But what was encouraging was that often you would see how people who were living and working on the streets accommodated the street dogs. So, for example, I can remember seeing someone who was basically a barber, and his barber shop consisted of a chair outside next to a tree, and hanging on a tree was a mirror, and people would just go and be paid to have their beards trimmed in that environment. But what was intriguing was that next to the chair where the customers sat was a carpet, and that carpet was a home that the barber had made available for a street dog. And that street dog knew that he or she could live on that carpet, could sit on the carpet, sleep on the carpet, because the barber shared his food with the dog. So you had someone here who had, in a Western view of the world, who had virtually nothing, but was made space and love, I think, for the street dog by sharing his space and time and food with him. And so not wanting to romanticize the whole thing about street dogs, because they do face many issues, but there is a way in which we can live with animals, and seeing it happen in other countries that completely challenges our Western thinking about how we live with animals. And many of the videos from these local groups who do street dog rescue, I've watched them take severely injured dogs, and I mean really severely injured dogs who, if they were in this country, would most likely be euthanized. But they are able to, with very limited resources, they're able to save and rescue and rehabilitate those dogs. And it's heroic work. It's truly heroic work. I've got great admiration for them. So yes, there's that example is just one example, I think, of how when we travel to other countries, we're challenged with our conceptions that we have in this country,
Yeah.
of what our attitudes towards animals are.
Yeah.
And I know that people have said to me when they've come here that they've particularly noticed how so many people walking the streets are walking the streets with dogs, how there's such a high percentage of people who, when they go out for a walk for whatever purpose, they have a dog with them. And they don't see that in as many countries as where they come from.
Yeah, I think using the dogs as an example there, I mean, it is interesting when, when I've talked to other people, Victoria Featherstone Pierce, who runs Canine Angels, and she works with dogs abroad. And obviously Peter Regan is a big advocate for speaking out for animals, the dogs as well. And how they're perceived in other countries. Turkey, we have this big thing in the news at the moment where the street dogs are getting rounded up and killed. So it is quite nice to hear, it's really, really pleasant to hear what you're talking about. But I also think that the more horrendous the animal rights situations are in some countries, the braver the activists as well, because there are activists still there, prepared to fight, put their liberty and maybe their life on the line for the animals. So it's kind of, it's not a straightforward situation, because we do look at different animals in different ways. I mean, I was talking in the video I did at the weekend about, cats and dogs and then cows, and how one animal is a commodity and the other animals are in our homes, and actually they're both equally capable of feeling love and having relationships. And anyway, I feel as if I could go on forever on that one. So you're writing a book at the moment. I know you mentioned at the beginning that you wrote a book called Growl, and you're in the process of writing a book about Topsy the elephant. So could you talk me through the process of how you write and why you decided to write about Topsy?
Okay, so Topsy was an elephant who was captured as a baby in the Southeast Asia, don't know where exactly, in 1875, and was brought to the United States via Germany as a baby when she was 1 to 2 years old. And she ended up working for most of her life with a circus called Fourpaw, which is Forepaugh, not Fourpaw, although sometimes they did present themselves with that name. And like many elephants then and now, she was provoked, and she was very cruelly trained to perform acts in a circus ring. So she attacked and killed. She attacked 2 people on 2 separate occasions, and she killed one of them. And she ended up being sold by the circus and owned by something called Luna Park, which was an amusement park on Coney Island, New York. And if anyone knows anything about Topsy, it's how she was killed. And she was electrocuted to death at Luna Park, deliberately electrocuted to death. And there's a film of the electrocution that is available to watch on YouTube. And I heard about her story and saw the footage, and it led me to want to try and do something so that her life wasn't just so wasted. And so I decided to write her biography. And so at the moment, I'm in the midst of writing the biography of Topsy, but situating her within a modern context, and asking questions like, what would happen to Topsy if she were alive today? Would she go into an elephant sanctuary? Would she be sold and exported to a circus in South America? Would she be killed? And so this is a major project that's been with me already for some years. And but I'm determined to get the book published within the next 3 to 5 years.
So is this the same elephant? I mean, I maybe wasn't aware of her name, but who was used in demonstrating electricity? Is that how she was electrocuted? I'm sure I do remember something. I've seen a really, really grainy old film of an elephant being electrocuted in the demonstration of electricity.
It wasn't to demonstrate electricity, but this is probably the film that we're talking about, the same film. There is certain amount of confusion about a misunderstanding about Topsy. there was a series of experiments with electricity by Edison
Yeah.
in New Jersey in his research laboratory, a couple of decades prior to Topsy being electrocuted, whereby Edison electrocuted some dogs and some farmed animals, and as a way to test the power of the electricity. There's a lot more that can be said about that.
Yeah.
And people often think incorrectly that Edison electrocuted the elephant Topsy. That's not the case. Edison wasn't there.
Right.
There was the film that was made by the film of the electrocution was made by a company called the Edison Manufacturing Company, but Edison had nothing to do with that company. It just had his name on the company. So anyway, regardless of the issue to do with Edison, she was electrocuted to death. She was fed poisoned carrots, and there's also reports that she was actually hung after the electrocution to make sure she was dead. So it's a particularly horrible way to kill an elephant. And you know, circuses then, and to a certain extent now, throughout the late 1800s, killed elephants when they became big and powerful, and they couldn't control them, and they attacked and killed the trainers as well as members of the public. They were killed in many different ways. Topsy is the only one who was electrocuted to death. There are reports of another attempt to electrocute an elephant, but that didn't either happen. It's false reports, or it was not quite accurately reported. I'm investigating this story now, and but elephants were hung, and they were shot by a firing squad, and they were drowned as well. So and poisoned, and so Topsy is one of many elephants who were captured in the wild and forced to perform in circuses and kept imprisoned in zoos. But through telling her story, I want to tell the bigger picture of elephants generally, as well as animals as well. Yeah.
Wow, that sounds absolutely just horrendous. I can't. I had no idea actually. It's something which obviously I do remember seeing that grainy footage, but I don't remember. I wasn't aware of all of the bigger issues around elephants in that sort of day and age. Absolutely awful. Right. So what's next for you then?
Well, I'm busy on a number of sorry?
Apart from the book you're writing.
Apart from Topsy, yes, that's a big part of my working life. I continue to work with the British Library on the collection. That hopefully is going to be available later this year. There is going to be a public meeting coming up in July to celebrate the acquisition of the collection, which will be held at the British Library. That's going to be on July 22nd, and that's at a time with the bicentenary. I can't say much more about it right now because they're still in the process of finalizing the program of the meeting. I'm on the board of the Culture and Animals Foundation, and we make grants to artists and academics to fund their work involving animal rights issues. And I'm in the midst of, with other people on the board, reviewing 150 grant applications from around the world, which is a good piece of work, but very time-consuming piece of work. And then I'm going to Zurich in a month's time to spend a week with Tier and Recht and working with them on their library and their development of preserving the history of the animal rights movement. So quite busy.
What I was going to say was, I mean, obviously you've mentioned quite a few things there. Your book for starters, and all, and the British Archives, the British Library, the Archives, and Tier and Recht as well. What we'll do is we'll put some links in when we in the post when we air this interview, so people can actually look at them properly, rather than have to remember them when we're talking about them now. But thank you very much. It's been really absolutely fascinating talking to you today. I think we could talk for a long time about lots of these subjects. So we've just touched on them really. But I do really appreciate you giving up your time today. So I'm going to sign off for now and say thank you very much to Kim Stallwood. This is Anna Amelia from Northeast Animal Rights saying thank you for watching and goodbye for now.
Well, thank you, Anna. It's been a great pleasure to talk with you and a great honor, and good luck with all your work for animal rights.
Thank you very much.